Hello, welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Q&A video today. Thanks very much for all your comments and questions as always. I've been on my travels. I have been testing a really good test actually, BMW M1000 XR, which I rode at the launch earlier in the year. I was absolutely blown away by it. It's a super bike, a comfortable super bike, but with nothing taken away. It's amazing. Against its natural rival, which is the Ducati Multistrada V4 Pikes Peak. So we did quite an extensive road test on that, on two bikes which on the face of it look and sound very similar, but in actual fact they're very different, and they cater for very different kind of riders and scenarios. But needless to say, they're a pair of absolute apex tall rounder predators. Amazing, really amazing. So that test is going to be in MCN soon, so check that out. I've been on my GSX-R800V4 around Donington. I'm going to do a little video on that. That was amazing. I, like everybody, looked with interest when all the news came out regarding the new Ducati Panigale V4S. Loads of changes there, isn't there, with styling, double-sided swing arm and everything in between. Ducati are slowly making their superbike more ordinary, aren't they? You know, the original Panigale had a really stiff airbox frame which couldn't give the bike any flex, so it was quite unstable, quite angry. Then they've gone to this kind of partial airbox frame, or partial frame, which gives it a bit more flex. And now they're giving more flex to the swing arm. The single-sided swing arm's ultra stiff because it needs to be, so it's just one side basically. And now they're making it a little bit more flexy for more feel. So yeah, they're really serious about that. So I've been swatting up on that because the launch of that's coming up soon. And watched MotoGP, which is fantastic. So let's crack on with some questions, shall we? So the first one is from Chico M9Y. Thanks very much for your question. I always wonder why these MotoGP teams like Suzuki use that 800cc engine on the road. Why didn't they use that on the road? Obviously, not directly and with lots of cost cutting, but why didn't we ever get a GSX-R800V4? Were V4 engines just really expensive to make for the time? Well, really good question. I mean, how good would that have been? A GSX-R800V4, absolutely amazing. Well, yeah, the simple answer is price. I mean, you only have to look at what's going on now with all of these parallel twins that have come onto the market. Now, manufacturers are using parallel twins because they're cheap. They're not, they're good engines, and with 270-degree cranks, they can make them sound quite meaty as well. Absolutely nothing wrong with them at all, but they do kind of lack a little bit of character. And if they were that good, they'd be using them all along, wouldn't they? There would never have been any such thing as an SV650. There would have always been a GSX-8S or whatever. So not knocking the parallel twins, but they're done for price really. And exactly the same with the GP engines. V4s are hideously expensive to produce. There's a bank of two banks of two cylinders. Each have got their own cylinder heads and exhaust and all the rest of it compared to an inline four or twin. And in actual fact, I remember talking to Dave Hancock, who was Honda's test rider all the way through the 80s and 90s and noughties. He worked on some amazing projects from the original Fireblade through to VFRs, even the RCV road bike. And he was telling me that in the noughties, when MotoGP went from 2-stroke to 4-stroke, Honda had their V5, which was just an amazing engine. I got to try that in Nicky Hayden's bike in 2005 and 6, and it was just incredible. A beautiful mixture of high revs, torque, lovely smooth, flat power, amazing. And obviously it would have been a no-brainer to use it in a road bike. So they actually took one of their MotoGP engines and put it in an RC45 chassis with a view to seeing if they could make a V5 road bike. And MCN at the time, because they got kind of word from the inside that this might happen. Ran lots of stories on a potential V5 road bike coming out, but Dave was saying to me that the engine had to be dumbed down so much to make it reliable, to make it cost effective, that it was just too heavy and not really powerful enough. You know, as soon as you can't use all those exotic materials, as soon as you've got to make everything lighter so things wear out faster, they're not viable for a road engine, which is a real shame, you know. And there aren't many V4s left, are they? I mean, and the ones that are around still are expensive, you know, from RSV4s to V4 Panigales and Multistradas, etc. They're not cheap engines, and you know, especially with Suzuki, it's not really their ethos to produce ultra expensive bikes. So yeah, it's a real shame that we never really got a GSX-R800V4. I think I would have been at the front of the queue for that one, as I'm sure many of you would be as well. So yeah, so that's the reason, you know, the engines had to be dumbed down too much to make them kind of production ready. You only have to look at the RCV, that the road bike. In standard trim it's 160 bhp just to make it reliable. Then you can buy the race kit, which is about £8,500 or something it was at the time, to make it, you know, full fat, 200 odd horsepower, but then obviously all your warranty and everything goes out the window. So yeah, I don't think we'll ever see kind of funky bikes, sports bikes like that again, really. You know, like I said earlier with Ducati, really we're leaving it to them to sort of fly the flag for superbike exotica nowadays with nice engines. But yeah, great question, thank you very much. Next one is from Trevor Paris. Thanks for your question, mate. Another brilliant and informative video, Neasy, thank you very much. How electronic suspensions have their limitations, and that mechanical suspension ultimately is the best for adjustment for your personal requirements. I'm curious to know, do you think other electronic aids, i.e. ABS, traction control, etc., have their limitations or drawbacks compared to analog bikes? Cheers, Trev. But yeah, great question. So electronic suspension has its limitations, but really only when you're talking about track work, really. The great thing about electronic suspension is that you've got loads of suspension setups at your fingertips that take a second to call into action. So a lot of electronic suspension is linked to riding modes. So in a soft riding mode, you'll have soft suspension. Sporty riding mode, you'd have hard suspension. And that suspension kind of toughens up or softens off, mainly with compression damping. That's what makes the suspension feel softer. Some bikes have got electronic rear preload as well. So that gives you more or less sag to give the kind of more supple feel or more stiffer feel. And it's brilliant, you know, on bikes I've had with electronic suspension, you know, you cruise down the motorway in comfort with everything nice and soft. As soon as you want to have some fun in the bend, you put it stiff and the bike kind of comes up on its haunches. It's a lot more stable, it's a lot more flickable. You can put the bike exactly where you want and then bring it back again. You know, and the same for track days. You can go to a track day, put a race mode in. Some bikes let you really dive in to the settings and change compression and rebound and preload as you would normal suspension. But ultimately, at the limit, it's got its limitations. So for example, the KTM Super Duke I'm running at the moment, there's no front preload adjustment. There's no way you can change the front sag. So for example, on my bike, I'm not using enough travel even on track on my KTM, so there's nothing really you can do other than make the compression damping harder, which is kind of not the way you would do it if it had normal suspension. And the feel isn't quite as kind of engaging or as plush as you'd get traveling through the stroke of normal suspension, where you get all that lovely feel and control and everything. But it's pretty close, you know, just nitpicking there. So electronic suspension does have some limitations. And obviously we've spoken before as well, you know, the springs in electronic suspension, apart from BMW GS, which has got variable spring rate at the rear, you're stuck with the springs. So if you're really heavy or really light, you might fall outside of the suspension's kind of working area and it might not be absolutely perfect. But in general terms, electronic suspension is really good. In terms of other rider aids, well, let's see what we've got. Traction control. Does that ever, are there any drawbacks? I'd say no. I mean, with all these electronics, the complication and the weight of them, you could say are slight drawbacks, but to be honest, in all the bikes we test, I mean, electronics have really been prevalent for the last 15 years maybe. I've never had any real problems with, you know, electronic suspension failures or any electronic failures really. I think the system's all pretty robust. The weight, I think when you've got a road bike, you're not really going to notice the weight of extra electronics because the road bikes are kind of quite heavy anyway. So yeah, so electronics haven't really got the limitations there. Traction control, why wouldn't you have it? It doesn't really get in the way. Most systems will let you turn the traction control right down or off. So every bit as good as an analog bike, but you've got your safety net there of electronics to help you if needs be, which can help you on the track as well as the road. What else have we got? Wheelie control. That doesn't get in the way. Again, you know, if you can turn these systems off, that's fine. Quick shifters, auto blippers, no brainer. They're really nice to use, even when you're short shifting, as well as absolutely flat out. So, you know, and you could always use the clutch if you wanted to as well, if you didn't want the electronics to intrude. Riding modes, they're pretty good when you've got riding modes that have got all the other electronic rider aids tied in with them, you know, from suspension to traction control to wheelie control and everything. You just choose the riding mode you want and then off you go. The only time I'd say within riding modes is power modes, a little bit of a waste of time, because generally the middle modes are always the best. The more aggressive modes are too snatchy on the throttle, and the kind of the rain modes just feel too dull. So yeah, generally the mapping you just want to keep as it is. But then you go even further with that, with like the new generation of Ducati Superbikes and Super Nakeds or whatever, where they're mapped gear by gear. So they give you the perfect amount of power per gear, and that's really, really good. Engine braking control, that doesn't get in the way of normal riding, so yeah, why not? But the big one that really, probably the worst riding aid really, is ABS. Some manufacturers do it really well, so you'd never know the bikes have got ABS. Normally European manufacturers, we've spoken about this before, you know, let's just talk about a few bikes I've ridden lately. M1000XR brakes are astonishing in every single way, feel and power, just mind-blowing. The Ducati Pipe Speed comes close, a little bit of a kind of a wooden feel that the ABS gives you, but not a lot. Again, fantastic. And I've been riding a friend of mine's GSX-R1000R, as have a few of other friends that we've done some riding trips lately, and everyone who gets on that GSX-R says how horrendous the brakes are, and that's purely down to ABS, which kind of robs the system of all its power and all of its feel. So yeah, ABS, but I think no one's ever mentioned this. ABS has taken this kind of journey, you know, manufacturers never admit it. I mean, before lean sensitive ABS was kind of okay, didn't really change the feel of the bikes too much. Then the IMUs came in and some of the manufacturers created braking systems that didn't have any feel or power. But over the last few years, I think they're coming out of that. Some of the Japanese bikes feel a lot better with the ABS. The Yamaha XSR900GP that I rode recently was pretty good. The latest generation of Triumph Street Triples are really good because they kind of went downhill the last generation. So I think manufacturers are finding their way around, you know, making their ABSs feel decent. But yeah, great question. Next one is from Timmy Zoo 1. Hi Neezy, thanks for another informative Q&A session. No problem. I've a very specific question about fork or suspension dimensions. I'm in the market for a middleweight sports bike, and I did test ride for pretty much all of them. I did test rides except the Daytona 660. In my test ride, the front fork on the ZX-R or ZX-4RR did feel relatively soft, for example, compared to the R7. To my surprise, the diameter of the ZX-4RR is only 37mm, while all the others are 41mm, and my current Duke 390 is even 43mm. In the world of bigger is better, brake disc, displacement, etc., does this mean anything? Would it be more difficult to find replacement cartridges because of an odd diameter? Look forward to your opinion. Yeah, that's a good question actually. Fork diameter. Fork diameter does change the way the front end of a bike feels. For example, I remember when MV were churning out F4000s and Brutalis for fun back in the day, when we used to ride them a lot in the noughties, and even Bermotas as well, some of them. The fork diameters were huge and they really didn't give a nice feel for the front end. You know, they were designed probably for their Italian hotshot test rider to break absolutely viciously into a corner at Misano or whatever, and you probably get good stability. But you know, on the road, there's zero flex in a big fork, so they just feel dead. And in this world now where motorbikes need, well, manufacturers have realised that motorbikes need to be flexible when they're at full lean, you know, big girder forks probably aren't a good idea anyway. And generally, the smaller the fork diameter, the more feel you've got. It's nice. So, you know, if you can get away with a small fork diameter, a manufacturer, for a nice feel, then, you know, that's what they'll do. In terms of sort of the general overall feel, what you're feeling from the fork really is the fork spring. So, you know, whether you've got a 37mm fork or 41mm fork, if you've got hard springs in the smaller forks and the soft spring in the bigger forks are going to feel softer. So yeah, it's more of a setup thing than that actual fork diameter. And most manufacturers nowadays have got it dead right. They've got the right fork diameter on their bikes to give the bikes kind of feel and support and all the rest of it. In terms of kind of odd fork diameters and getting replacement cartridge kits, I think it's more a case of the bikes they're fitted to. So something for a ZX-4RR, even though it's got small fork diameter, I think you're going to find it easy to get replacement aftermarket racing fork internals, because it's a popular sports bike and they're being raced as well, especially in the UK. There's a class, a one make series for those at BSB level. So, you know, if you got on one of those, it would feel taut and controlled and beautiful, regardless of the fork diameter or whatever. So, bigger definitely isn't better when it comes to fork diameter, like some things, like brake discs and everything. But like everything in motorcycling, it's a compromise. You know, if you jump on a MotoGP bike, it's got the best of the best everything, but the level is so high, it would be awful to ride unless you can ride within a second of the bike it's designed to, the rider. And conversely, something that's kind of soft and everything, and you know, kind of lazy, you would imagine isn't very good, but it's very accessible, very easy to ride. So everything's a compromise on a motorcycle, which is why everything's kind of always in the middle when it comes to production bikes, kind of just to suit everybody. As soon as you want to make the bike a little bit more specific, then you're going to make it worse for another person. So yeah, really good question, thank you very much. Next is from Cod Rut Alexandrescu. Anyway, I hope I haven't massacred your name too much. I do apologise, but thanks very much for your question. Hi, I appreciate a lot of all your work and videos, which I find very inspiring. Thank you very much, unlike my pronunciation of your name. I have a question that might sound stupid, but I didn't find a clear and documented answer. I ride an S1000RR 2020, and on the street, especially in tight corners, I feel the need of slightly pulling the clutch in to get better control of the power, like in a slow speed manoeuvre. Is that wrong? Should I not touch the clutch? Great question. I mean, in normal riding, definitely you shouldn't really touch the clutch. It's just one more control, one more kind of barrier you've got to kind of smoother riding, smooth throttle control. At very low speed, you know, if you're talking, you're riding around town and you've got kind of a corner that you almost have to steer around the proper way, you know, steer where you're going, then you might need a little bit of clutch, slip the clutch just to make the bike go a little bit smoother. But, you know, once you're out on the open road, even if it's a kind of a tight first gear hairpin, well, if it's really tight, you might be able to use a little bit of clutch, but generally not. You know, but I know what you mean. When you've got a very powerful bike and you're in a very slow corner, you do feel like you need to slip the clutch just to give yourself a little bit more control. But really, I suppose it's a question of how you enter the corners, you know, the speed you go in. And, you know, with real tight corners, what I do is drag the back brake a lot anyway. So you can kind of accelerate against the back brake to make everything nice and smooth, so you know, the transition from off throttle to on throttle isn't too jerky, which I guess that's what you're trying to iron out by putting the clutch in. But if you can drag the back brake as you're going through the corner and then start accelerating with the back brake on, then everything stays nice and smooth. So I would say stay off the clutch and get your foot on the back brake. But thanks very much for your question. Next one's from Quacker. Hi Neezy, question for you. Because we're having so much rain in the UK, aren't we just? A wet track day is becoming more common. For someone in a novice group riding on Diablo Rosso Corsa 2, would I get any benefit from running wets? Keep up the good work. Thank you very much. That's an interesting question. I mean, it's hard to answer really. If you were racing, if you were going on track just to go fast, you would 100% put wets on when it's raining. Anything less than that isn't going to give you the grip or the confidence. In a track day scenario, it's slightly different, isn't it? You're going out to enjoy yourself. I personally wouldn't ride around a track unless I had to for a test on normal road tyres. It's just, you've got to ride on eggshells so much that for me some of that enjoyment's taken away. And with the wet, it's a fine line between staying on and coming off. You know, if you have a slide in the wet, normally you're off. Whereas if it happens in the dry, there's more of a grey area between black and, you know, the black and white of grip or no grip. Something like a Diablo Rosso Corsa 2, and also I don't really think it's anything, it's not linked to your ability. You know, tyres are, whether an experienced rider goes out and wets or road tyres or inexperienced, the same risks are there. So if you're riding Rosso Corsa 2s, obviously that's a kind of a track day tyre, not really designed for riding in the wet. You can ride it safely in the wet, but you've just got to go really, really steady. You know, do all your braking in a straight line, never trail brake, do all your acceleration in a straight line, you know, nice and carefully. If you wanted to ride road tyres on the track, sports touring tyres are probably the best. But there again, you've got the problem, if the weather changes, you're stuck on inappropriate tyres. Now, putting wets on would give you a lot more safety, a lot more grip. Would it give you a lot more pleasure? Would you be able to, you still wouldn't be able to ride as fast as you could do in the dry. So, and having wets gives you a whole load more problems. All of a sudden you need a spare set of wheels. You're going to need stands for the bike to prop it up on while you change the wheels. You're going to need tools. You know, you're going to be rushing around between sessions trying to change tyres, put them on or off. It's a real difficult one really, and yeah, it's a problem in the UK where it can be sunny one minute and absolutely hammering down the next. What I would do personally for track days is get the best tyre I could do for the dry for maximum enjoyment, and then I'd sit out the wet sessions. But you know, if you are going to ride in the wet and you don't want the hassle of wets, then maybe go down a few notches with your tyres, make them less sporty and a little bit more road orientated, and they'll generally have more tread in them to get rid of the water, more grooves, and they'll be a compound that more suited to colder conditions as well. So yeah, tricky to answer that one really, other than just get good dry track tyres and just go out in the dry. Anyway, thanks very much for that. And finally, from Chris Taylor 5924, great videos Michael, saw recently you wrote about helmet noise and your hearing. Our sports touring helmet's much quieter than things like RX-7V Arais. Love my race lids, but if there are quieter options, would consider them. Many thanks. Great question. Yeah, I'm really paranoid about my hearing because I'm deaf in my left ear. I've been since I was 6 through getting the mumps. My good ear has got heavy duty tinnitus in it, and the level of it's going down. So, you know, old age and loud motorbikes and music's done that. So I'm really worried about this. I always wear earplugs. I always throw my earplugs away every single day, so use new ones because you don't notice them degrade. And so I try and do that to mitigate noise damage. And I've started wearing more touring crash helmets as well. So, you know, RX-7s are beautiful things, but with the scoops on top, anything that's got, you know, scoops or things jutting out is going to cause turbulence, and that's going to cause noise. Obviously that's not a problem for racing, because you want your crash helmets to be as light and as vented as possible. So with all these vents, I mean, RI even used to call their crash helmets super vent, didn't they? With all these vents, it's hard to completely seal them off or to stop them causing any turbulence. So I've gone to more smoother crash helmets. So wear a showy touring lid now, and it's nice and smooth and it's nice and quiet. And also the shape makes a difference. So for example, this Alpine Stars lid is really well vented, but the shape of it with its kind of big scoop at the back like a cycling helmet, actually it's pretty quiet, but not as quiet as a sports touring helmet. So yeah, I love my race lids. I think there's nothing like the look of a really cool race lid, especially if you can splash a paint job onto it. But if you're going to do long distance, you know, touring through Europe now, I'd never wear a racing lid. I'd always wear a sports touring lid, just because they're nice and quiet, and generally they're generally plusher, comfortable to wear. You know, they've got features in them like that. My Shoei's got a drop down visor, which I never thought I'd like, but they're actually pretty useful. You can put an intercom in it, which I use to listen to music, not to talk to other people. So you kind of got all those added niceties as well. But yeah, maybe you should try one to see what you think. So that's it for this week's Q&A. Thanks very much for watching. Keep those questions and comments rolling in, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.